Okay, last week we were looking at the subject of Christ being born new in the world. And next week we're going to look at the subject of our own transformation, our own being made new, if you will. That often comes with the aspirations we have with New Year's resolutions. Today we're going to look at something that bridges these two together. And, you know, from the title of this episode, that thing is truth. Our big goal is happiness in this life and heaven in the next. To achieve this, we need to stay close to God throughout each day. But how do we do that while living in the real world with all of its challenges and distractions? Growing our interior life through Christian mental prayer is the answer. This podcast mines the riches of the greatest spiritual tradition on earth so we can grow in holiness together. I'm Steve Smith. Thank you for joining me for Pearls of the Interior Life. Welcome to this episode. Thank you for making this time for the Lord, as always, and thank you for the opportunity to share in that time. So today we're looking at truth that bridges together the concept of bringing Christ anew in the world and looking for newness in ourselves in things like New Year's resolutions. And all right, so just for a starting point to all be on the same page, what is truth? Well, Jesus tells us, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And the question can and has been asked, why doesn't he just stop at I am the way? Why go from there? Why not just, I'm the way, follow me? Frank Sheed tells us, to have found the way is not the end, it is the beginning. Okay, why though? Why is that? And it's because God desires a relationship with us. He wants much more than us to simply follow him in some servile sense, like he's just some imperious tyrant, just do what I say. He wants us to share in it as much as we can in our human limitations, but to understand what he's doing, why he's doing it, to participate in it, to give our will over to it, to give the best of ourselves to it. That's why it doesn't just stop at being the way. And how do we do that? How do we come to know God? It means literally knowing him, knowing his way of living, knowing his laws. Let's pause there for a second, knowing his laws. As has also been said, we often tend to bristle at the idea of God's laws and all these rules that we have to live by. And there really aren't that many, by the way. There are lots of helpful guidelines that we get in addition, but the hard and fast laws of things, not so much. At any rate, the laws are like the banks of a river. Banks of a river, they're not these terrible impositions that just spoil all the fun of the river. It's what gives the river focus and energy. Without the banks of the river, you just have a just giant flood of water. You know, energyless, lifeless, destructive. The banks of the river, that's what the rules are for our life. They would give us purpose and focus and meaning, direction. And then we're meant to grow from that, obviously, much deeper, much deeper. And that comes from knowing Christ, because Christ is truth. He is truth incarnate. He is the Logos. He is uncreated wisdom. He is the mind of God. So the more we get to know Christ, the more we get to know truth, because they're the same thing. And now we can see where we have that bridging between our two topics, because the more we get to know Christ, the more we can live out his truth and bring that into the world. And then that's born, if you will, in the world in a new way. Christ is born anew because we bring Christ in the world in a way that he wouldn't be otherwise. You know, only we can go out in the world in the way that God has planned for us, in the activities of our life and the people that we meet and interact with. And then we can also see where that bridges us over to the topic of next week of interior transformation. What do you say when you accomplish something new, when you have some big goal and you get to the end of it, wherever that may be? Maybe you want to go climb a mountain, or you want to learn a new skill, or there's some performance or challenge or competition, and you get to the end and you say, wow, I really feel alive. All right, what is Christ? He is the way, the truth, and the life. the way and the truth lead to new life. And the more we embrace truth, God's truth for us, the more he can work that transformation in us that we so much desire. That is so much of those aspirations that we have at the beginning of the new year with those New Year resolutions. So this is what brings us to truth. Now, one other thing that can be said for certain about truth is that it's elusive. Who can doubt that truth was in short supply in the year 2020? And the reason for that is our fallen intellect. It is very difficult with our darkened intellect for us to know the truth. In fact, apart from Christ, it's very hard. It's almost random whether we happen upon it or not, again, because Christ is that truth. And so our darkened intellect, it naturally obscures the truth from us, even under the best of circumstances. St. Paul tells us we see as if in a mirror darkly, just a big, murky, dusty mirror. We can barely make out the general shape and form of the truth. And who can doubt that? We know that from all different experiences that we have. One just everyday facet of life that reveals that to us is lawsuits. You look at lawsuits, what happens? You have two different parties dealing with the same situation and seeing it completely differently. And I'm not talking about a criminal lawsuit, say, where you have perhaps a felon who is obviously going to lie because he has so much on the line and is probably very morally bankrupt. I'm just talking about civil suits where you may have differences of property rights, things like that, and you have two parties coming in looking at the same situation, and they will see it completely differently. And it's easy to write that off as it's just emotions getting involved and obscuring people's reason. But no, our legal system is set up to do the best that it can to filter those effects out. That's why there's a discovery process where both sides have to put all their cards on the table. So both sides understand the situation from 360 degrees. They're all looking at the same information. So basically to say, before you really go to war over this and go into court, are you sure you really have the case that you think you have now that you've seen all the information? And many times they'll still go ahead. And unless we think that that's still just being irrational, in many situations there will be technical experts on both sides, expert witnesses that'll come in and look at that same set of information and come to two completely opposing points of view, even on matters of hard science. Our science is not nearly so cut and dried as we often like to think. But again, just an everyday example of how elusive truth can be, where you can even have very technical matters, two different well-trained technical experts come to completely different opinions looking at that information. And yet there can only be one truth. It's elusive for us. We know this in the world. I mean, just look around us right now on the cavernous distance between opinions on the different issues of the day. And again, there can only be one truth. And this is where we find that thin plate and glass of relativism just shatters against the hard granite of Christ. We can't all have our own truth. There's ultimately only one, and it is a very messy matter, often trying to get to the bottom of that. And certainly we know just in our own everyday life, truth can be elusive and challenging. Just think of all the information that you're inundated with each day, all the decisions that you have to make from little to big. How much easier would it be if you had that confidence of knowing that you knew the truth, that you had perfect vision, perfect wisdom in each situation? It still might be challenging to make the decision. The decision may come with difficult consequences, but it would be that much easier if you at least had that confidence. I know the truth in this situation. And that's the thing that we have the most control over. That's what we want to focus on. Okay, so how do we do that? And that's what we get to next week, because Christian meditation is an indispensable way of having that confidence of truth in our life and the transformation that comes from it. And that's because Christian meditation is an indispensable way of coming to know Christ, who is truth itself. So there you have it. With that, I'm going to wish you a very, very happy New Year. And we're an Easter people at heart. We just celebrated Christmas, but we're Easter at heart. We're always looking for that resurrection, that new life. And so I wish that very much for all of you in 2021, and I look forward to being with you again.